right, we can get everybody to take a seat, find a seat. And I would just like to thank you all so much for being part of this amazing day, our first annual Conscious Eating Conference. I think it went really well. It was really an amazing day, and we are wrapping it up now with all of our speakers coming back to be able to have a one-on-one with you and talk to you and answer your questions directly. So I'm going to be facilitating. I think it's a small enough room that we can just have people, when you speak, why don't you stand up? Speak as loud as you can so others can hear you, okay? And I know we all have our own passions around this, and we want to make our own comments, and that's fine. You can totally do that. But let's keep it limited to a short amount of time, and then also make it into a question. Let's have a question at the end directed to someone on the stage, okay? And I'll help with that facilitation. But just be aware that the time is limited, and yeah. All right, thank you very much. And okay, we're going to start with some questions. So you ready?
Approaches such as Meat Less Monday campaigns have been described as taking baby steps. Are baby steps not appropriate for babies?
Can they be baby steps for non-babies or just baby steps for anybody? Are you asking if baby steps are an effective approach? Is that what you're asking? Well, personally, I think baby steps are great. I think meeting people where they're at is a really good thing, and I think giving people the tools that they need to make any change at all is a really positive thing. So I personally am an advocate for that, because I think once you start to open up that window, I think just the whole world opens up to people, and it really leads to a lot of other things.
So I'm going to say something really quick to Karen.
Hello? Yes.
Hello? Okay, good. It's not. Okay. Okay. So basically, the way that I view this and how I do this is that people are always going to do less than what you ask them to do. So I always feel like I'm going to always encourage people to go vegan, because they're going to do less than that anyway. And for me to think that they're actually going to take my suggestion and not already water it down, I think is a bit arrogant. So I think that more than likely that if you ask somebody to go vegan, they on their own are probably going to think, about not eating animals 1 day a week or 2 day a week. So I might as well hold the bar high and make sure that they try and hold the highest that they can possibly do, and then leave it up to them to water it down, so that at least I'm holding and maintaining the true mission of what I believe and what my organization stands for.
I share Lauren's view, and I think that one of the biggest mistakes that we have often made in the animal rights vegan movement is we're locked into this idea that people only take baby steps. And often we present people with the terrible realities that farmed animals are going through because of human consumption of these animals and their body parts. And people are overwhelmed with sadness and grief and rage when they learn these things and they see these videos, and then they say, what can I do? And then we let the animals and them down. When they're ready to hear something big, that they should do something big, we say, well, you don't have to do very much. All you have to do is this. See, we let them down, as well as the animals. We need to take a more proactive, we need to have more confidence in our mission and our purposes. We need to stop being apologetic and saying, well, people can only learn one little thing at a time. Well, there are people all over the world who are looking to do something big. People are looking to have big religious conversions of something. They want to do something big and meaningful. So while it's certainly true that for some people, incremental steps and baby steps is the way to go, and certainly what Lauren said, I agree with 100%. Set the bar high, because people are probably going to do maybe a little less than that. But at the same time, if you set the bar high, a lot of people are going to reach that bar. Whereas if you always set it low, they're never going to go beyond, well, I stopped eating veal. See, a step becomes a stop. And we never want to suggest to people that only a little bit is enough or that that's good enough. Because, again, we're letting animals down and we're letting people down when we say that. People want you to tell them this is an opportunity for you to do a positive, life-affirming, great thing by going vegan. Instead of saying kind of, well, you don't have to do very much. Well, yeah, you do have to do a lot. And people want to hear that this matters so much that they need to make this revolutionary change. So we need to get out of this whole thing about how, well, people will be offended, and we don't want to give people the idea they have to change overnight. Why not? Yeah, they should change overnight, because look at what these animals are going through. So that's my answer.
Wait, hold on. I just have to clarify, because that's not fair. Because I just want to make it clear that my work is entirely dedicated to raising the bar and keeping that bar high for people. So what I meant is, when someone came to me and said, I've stopped eating, animals on Monday, I'm not going to say to them, well, that really sucks. I'm going to say, that's great. Let me give you more tools so that you can do it completely. So I just want to I completely agree with what they're saying.
I don't think we question Colleen.
Yeah, I would like to say one thing before we switch up questions here. First of all, we know that about you. So don't we?
Yes.
So, okay, so let's give her a little hand here. Okay, that was great affirmation. Okay, just a quick comment to summarize my thoughts is that I think Karen struck a little chord with this, but I look at it from a different direction. I don't look at it from, and I don't think we need to look at it from within ourselves. I mean, I think we need to start looking at it from the planet's situation. And I think we need to start looking at it from the planet, the environment, all the resources for future generations. I think it's time. So even though it may be easier for an individual to take baby steps and make it work for them, I think we need to start reversing things out a little bit, because that's not helping our planet one bit. It's also not helping them. I mean, I'm just talking about my own practice. It's true that everybody has their own gauge or their own method of their own track that they need to move along. But let's do it this way: if they're on the verge of 4 or 5 different types of Western diseases, it's not going to help. It's not going to help them at all for me to tell them to do what's right 1/7 of the time. So there's a tactful way to do it. So the short answer, I guess, for you from me is that we need to reverse things out and start looking at things in terms of a planet, what's best for the planet, and then also for the person you might be talking with, or somebody might be encouraging to move in the right direction. You're really not helping them to as Karen was saying, that to allow them to do what's right 1/7 of the time. So yeah, I'd like to call on you. But well, I'll let somebody else answer that, but first of all, I'd let them go. No, there you go.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to condense everything. Yes, there is absolutely a danger that when the focus is just on factory farms, that can lead people to thinking that what they need to do is to purchase humane or free-range animals, even though many of the problems are just as bad or worse in this supposedly alternative system. And James McWilliams spoke on this as well. So yes, absolutely. All the time we have to be explaining to people not only are factory farms bad, but these other systems are also bad. And we have to be careful that when we do this, that somehow we don't make them think that factory farms are then okay, or that there's no difference. You see, it's and I have this problem with my own students where, they'll go, okay, well then locavore is no good, so I'll just won't do any changes. So somehow we have to very carefully explain to them that, and I think you did a great job of this in your presentation about how you formulate the solution and the problem. That can be very helpful and I loved what you said, that factory farms are an effect of a problem of speciesism. And I think that's very helpful.
Thank you.
So, first of all, the calves that you're seeing are female replacer calves. They're not veal calves in Point Reyes area. Whenever you see the baby female calves in the state of California, those are the females who are going to replace their mamas. So they too kept her in captivity that looked no different than quote-unquote veal calves. So people in California should be aware that the females are kept in exactly the same conditions as male calves. So just so you know. But also I think, when I do my talks, a lot of time I talk a lot about the things that are no different. So regardless of where your eggs come from, you still have the male chicks who are killed in absolutely the same way. There is no difference in that. There's no difference in the transport or the slaughter of the animals. So maybe focusing less on these gestation crates, farrowing crates, battery cages, whatever it is that some organizations are working to phase out. At the end of the day, the way these animals come into the world and the way they are killed are the same. And so maybe focusing more on those areas, what I've found out is and this is over time, more, 10 years ago I didn't have to worry about it as much. Now I do, which is an interesting perspective to be in. But focusing on those things, I think, is just as important.
Well, I think you missed our talk. The 3 o'clock talk was on. It's okay. So we're working on that issue very specifically in Oakland and in the Bay Area. So if you want to check out our website, noslaughter.org, and come to the table to get our postcards and find out about what we're doing. But that's exactly what we're doing. And I was saying in our talk is that we're doing some things very specifically to make it illegal for people to keep and kill animals in Oakland. But around the specific work we're doing, we've been able to have this discourse in the public. And we've changed the conversation so that we're able to talk about the inherent violence in keeping and killing animals, which is from birth to, from cradle to grave, basically, which is the hatcheries to the slaughter itself. And so that, to me, is when people talk to me about this issue, I never talk about factory farming. You'll never hear in anything I say. I never talk about factory farming. I talk about the inherent violence of turning animals into butchered bodies. And when you change your discourse and you change your language, so that's what you're talking about, people then hear it on that level, and then the conversation becomes about that inherent violence rather than about methods.
And one of the things I mentioned this morning in my talk is that when you read the history of actual animal farming up to the middle of the 20th century, when so-called factory farming became the standard method of raising animals, the story of animal farming going back through history and in other cultures is a horrible story. We don't have time to go into this, but again, factory farming derived from animal farming, which has always included mutilations, horrible things to separate like baby animals from sucking on their mothers, putting bad tasting things on their udders and their teats and whatnot, and a routine part of raising animals for food since time immemorial is if they're not productive, you wring their necks or you beat them over the head to death. You get rid of them because farmers do not keep animals who are not productive. They are not going to feed animals and have to deal with animals and waste an iota of labor on an animal who is not going to be a return on the investment. And that is true of just animal farming, the same as it was of human slavery. It operated on the same principle. It was cheaper to let an African-American slave die and suffer a horrible illness than to pay for a doctor. It was cheaper to just get a replacement. So this is just the nature of slavery.
All right, first of all, let's split that out a little bit. Australia, you have to know the source first. It'd be a good argument, with anybody at any point in time, from wherever they might be, wherever the origin is. But Australia, you need to understand a little bit more about that in the sense that they have the second largest rate of deforestation now in the world, including Malaysia, Amazon basin, et cetera. Secondly, it's near 1 million acres a year. So we're not just talking about, humaneness here. We're talking about humaneness for health of our planet. Secondly, is that they also have, as I mentioned, they have a number of species from a biodiversity loss standpoint. So they're being lost at a higher rate than anywhere else in the world. koalas are expected to become extinct in 20 years. There are a number of other species. So they're really devastating their continent and by what they're doing. And yes, it is because of their grass-fed movement. They really have the majority of cattle there are grass-fed, of course. And but secondly, they also have now it's becoming the relativity factor of what they're consuming to their overall national health is becoming front stage. And so they're starting to make that connection. So there are a lot of issues that are at play there. Now, I'm not that familiar. I'm familiar with a number of things in Australia, but not in terms of what governs their, I know bits and pieces, but what governs their slaughtering process. I'm very familiar here. I know exactly what's going on in terms of the USDA, what's happening there, and also on grass-fed farms. But I don't know that Temple Grandin has her influence in Australia yet. Probably so. But nevertheless, my point to this is, and I'll let somebody else take over, is that it's nice to always know if you have an argument, or and I'm talking about an intellectual argument, that you have you have a base of understanding of where they're coming from, at least. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, this one is a big one right now, and it's just so amazing to me because it's like let's do 30 different dances and spin around and go upside down and try to find a way to justify eating animals. And now it's we gotcha. And vegans and animal advocates always feel they have to be constantly chasing after the best defense against these ridiculous justifications. And that's what that one comes down to as well. Do not tell me that I am causing more harm than someone who's consuming animals and creating that kind of suffering. And that's what's happening now, is the discourse is becoming that, literally pointing the finger at vegans and saying that we're causing more harm for the animals who are being killed because of the animals in these in the creating especially as they're creating the what am I trying to say? Tilling, thank you. I was going like this, tilling. I was hoping someone would pick up on that. But it's amazing to me because they're constantly dancing around this issue, and you still can't get around the fact that you have to raise and kill these animals and kill their babies, and that's the end game for all of this that we're talking about. But I really think it's important, too, when I talk to people about these issues, to talk about the bigger issue. It works in the Australia one, but it also works in California, that has been a cattle region from the very inception of this state, before it was a state, even. And if these are non-indigenous animals in this region, and the amount of resources that you have to use to keep those animals alive, only to eat, only so that we can kill them, makes no sense from a biodiversity standpoint, from a resource perspective, water perspective, and all human health and the wildlife that people say they do care about. Most people would say that they care about koalas. And so we're trying to keep cattle alive. I love cattle, but that's not the answer to our civilization, is making sure that we can raise more cattle for people when it's causing destruction on every single level. So I don't think we have to get into this answer of let me go read the scientific literature to see if they're right and how, or they're not right, but how I can counter that specifically. I think the bigger issue of, for what? We don't need to consume these animals. We don't need to do it. So why are we creating so much harm and so much damage trying to make it happen?
If I could just add in briefly. So the argument that you're making, that this friend made to you, is actually very common. Michael Pollan makes the same argument in a chapter titled The Vegan Utopia. It is the smart, in scare quotes, argument against veganism. And the argument, for those that are unfamiliar, although unfortunately probably most of you are too familiar with it, is that growing crops kills animals, being the tilling process, and it kills more animals pound for pound than the cow. So the problem with it is as earlier mentioned, a couple. One, the environmental impacts actually are going to kill way more animals than the 1 pound. As we heard from the UN report, as wildlife habitat is destroyed for pasture grazing, that's going to destroy more of those animals. Secondly, in a way even more importantly, it's just grouping together death without any view of suffering. Now, of course, we need to think ways, and there is a listening aspect, we need to think ways to harvest our grain that don't harm animals, and we need to start thinking about that. So it's not, let's dismiss. Anytime somebody says, I say, yes, let's work together, try to think of how we could do that. So it's not somehow okay, let's end that conversation. But if it's sincere, yes, we need to figure out how to do grain that harms fewer animals. But it's also true that for the entire life of those animals, they had an actual animal life before the moment of the death. And no matter how much they want to romanticize any of these free-range animals, they don't. And they're viable, sellable commodities that have things like castration uniformly. So it's not true factually, and it's not true ethically.
It's very quick, but I just would add that, who are these farmers who are tilling the rabbits in the field, right? If they don't care about the animals that they're running over with their tractors, that's a problem. And I feel like if there are more consumers who actually cared about these issues, we would have a stronger argument to make for reforms in the industry. So, if someone did operate a farm that harmed lots of rabbits, mice, other animals in the field that they're tilling to get our vegan food, I would say, well, can we support a farm that doesn't do that, right? And right now, as a small group of people, 1% or arguably more, we don't have that kind of consumer power, but we're also not necessarily investing in something that involves killing. It's sort of incidental to the process. So, I would like to see those reforms happen, and I think that they're possible. It's just, that's what we have to push for, right?
And I think there was a counter to all of those. I think, email me, because I think we saw an article, comments on an article that came out about that, and someone, a scientist, literally responded to each one of those points.
There's a bunch of scientists who've done that.
Yeah.
I got the links to where that was.
Great. Good, great. So see, what's your name again? Jordan. So let's see Jordan. Email Jordan. She's had her hand up, I think, from the beginning.
My question is for Vasily. It seems that the idea of happy meat has a much larger historical context. When we think of someone like Temple Grandin, who's been very much presented as the source of a narrative in which animals are compliant with their own death, and if we look at the development of a certain kind of humane discourse, it's very much contiguous with the development of industrial agriculture. Can you comment on this bigger picture?
That's an amazing question. When you were speaking, what I was actually thinking is how, in a way, we have one. Now all the arguments against veganism, ironically, are actually about animals. You know what I mean? It's like, well, actually, in some way, you actually are. And in a way, we've now won, because the discourse is all, well, which system actually will help the animals the most? So even though the arguments seem crazy, backwards, in a way, it's a positive sign, because we now, or at least, there's a consensus that the animals matter, and how can we? Okay, I'll just wait one more comment to pass it. No, I think you're just pointing on, I think, a very fascinating paradox. So, you look at René Descartes, who thought that animals were just automatons. And when he was writing these words in the 1600s, animals were way better off in any way that you want to think about it, in terms of extinction levels, and even the most diehard speciesist wouldn't make that claim now, but there's actually epic growing amounts of abuse. So it is a fascinating paradox. I don't have the solution. I will say this, I think that and this kind of goes to the heart of the earlier presentation, and it was really the idea I believe the most. Local farming, humane farming, is phrased as a critique, as a different system. It's the same system. They won't let you see what happens in the factory farms. You have to see something. So there's almost like the circus effect, where you can see the raising of the animals and the killing of the animals, but you can't eat them because there isn't enough to eat. So you have people who can see and touch these animals that aren't how the animals are actually being treated, who are then eating factory farm meat. So it works together as one system. And this ties into the great work that they're both doing with the backyard slaughter, which for me is a democratization of this type of speciesism, where not everyone can personally engage as a speciesist, which makes it impossible for them to ever truly critique the factory farm system. So I believe that there's a rise of this humane language, particularly to democratize the speciesist logic that's behind the entire factory farm system itself. That's right. Mm-hmm. More people can buy into it. Everyone can raise and kill their own chicken. How can you ever really protest against the factory farm? That's exactly right. And that's why the work they're doing is, to my mind, so important.
Anyone else want to comment on that on the panel? Okay, hang on just a second. We're going to have another question.
I'll answer the question, the first one, because I can't answer the second one, because that's your question. But the first one is, you know, I've been doing this work for a long time and guiding people to actually make the change. And I'm really grateful because I've seen people make the change and stay that way. Because for me, it's a real mind shift. For me, it's not just behavioral change. You know, giving people, my approach is to give people the information and to give them the tools and resources and really keep that bar high and really trust that they're going to make the changes based on that information. And they do. So quite literally, and I'm really not saying this as a plug, I mean, my 30-day vegan challenge really is that idea. It's do it. I'm going to hold your hand. I'm going to guide you. I'm going to give you everything you need. And then at the end of it, you know, obviously my hope is that they will stay it. And from what I've stay with it, and from what I've seen, they have. So I think, you know, giving people the tools to really make the shift, because it really is quite literally paradigm shifts. And when you give people the tools to do that, they do it. They really do it.
I guess for me, it just, you know, doing this since I was in high school and learning what I feel like are the right ways to do it and the wrong ways to do things. So like when I was like 17 and yelling at how horrible and evil my family was for consuming turkeys on Thanksgiving probably wasn't the best way of going about it, and realizing that there's better ways of doing it than not. I think sometimes we as a movement think we're going to have this one silver bullet that's going to work for everybody. And I think that is just really naive. And I think that everybody's going to require different things. You know, some people are going to go vegan because of, you know, health. Some people are going to go for the environment. Some are going to go for animals. For Food Empowerment Project, we're an ethical organization. We're a justice-based organization. We want them to go for the sake of the animals. But we also know, as being a justice organization, that we're not going to only talk about the animals all the time. We have a newsletter we've created called Food Chain, where when people decide to go veg, that they get one a month for a year. And actually, Karen and Colleen have both contributed to it. And basically, every month is a different issue. So if it, you know, the first one's about cows, but it'll talk about the deforestation, it'll talk about health issues, it'll talk about labor issues, and it'll obviously, of course, talk about the animals. Because I don't think it's always going to be, sure, it was one thing for me. It was, you know, growing up in Texas and seeing the cows and learning about it all, but I don't think it's going to be the same thing for everybody. I think that's one notion we got to get out of our heads, you know, that we're going to have to be about meeting people where they are. And I don't mean that in terms of like, okay, well, yeah, call yourself a vegan and still eat ice cream. That's not what I mean. I mean people in terms of where they're at, in terms of where their interest levels are, and what's really going to drive and where their passions are.
Yeah, and speaking about that from an activist perspective, because it's one thing to say, you know, I mean, people will say, well, don't you think you should talk about this? Because this is where people are. People care more about this than that, so why don't you talk about that? You know, however, you know, there isn't one mind called the vegan mind. There isn't one vegan mind movement. There's all people doing all different things. Mine happens to be talking about compassion and talking about violence inherent in this. And when I talk about violence, it's across the board. It's the violence against nature. It's the violence against people. It's the violence against the animals. So for me, that's a message that really works for me because it's really authentic for me. So if activists are still trying to figure out what their voice is, I think the most authentic thing they can do is speak from their most authentic place. But I'm not going to change my message because I think the person I'm talking to should hear it about this. I am so proud to be able to speak for the animals and to see people actually respond to that, because so few people I find do it because they think they have to talk about health because they're the only thing they're going to care about. Again, like to the point of keeping the bar low, people are smarter than that. I'm so sick of people trying to talk down to people, you know, and try to give them the least amount of information possible. So I think the most effective thing we can do is speak from what is the most authentic place for ourselves.
one quick comment about that, if you don't mind, is that first of all, it's a great. Well, a quick recap that I want to comment on, the part of it that I want to comment on is basically that she was asking basically that understanding it's a capitalist system and that may have some issues with how to solve these problems based on the fact that it's more driven by profits. And do we have any thoughts in terms of solutions? And the first thought that comes to mind for me is to first of all acknowledge that there's a great deal of difficulty in the sense that you're exactly right, the way that you described that. But I think, and we can't leave out, I mean, many times we leave out fish out of the equation. They can't be left out at all. And the difficulty that we're having, and I'm bringing that in as a segue into some issues there, is that I think it's a perfect example of the fact that the entire fishing industry is including all of the organizations that are established right now for the general public and other institutions to gain some knowledge about how the oceans are being ravaged and give us some guidance in terms of what can be sustainable. It's still the same thing that we've been talking about, is that they're still skirting around the issue that it's not sustainable at all for many reasons to eat any type of fish right now. And I mean, other than possibly the local Bora Bora fishermen that might be, catching one fish for their dinner. So the issue, though, is that since they're all driven by profits, there has to be, I think, two sets of two areas that need to be addressed. One is education. There has to be, and that's why, I mean, this isn't a plug either. That's why I established this nonprofit organization, because I think we need some type of institutional an organization that can help align other organizations that are already set up, that are already established, that can make, like Oceana right now is a very influential organization. But Ted Danson summed it up perfectly well less than a year ago in front of maybe 25 million people that saw an interview that he had. And this is pretty close to the quote. And this is the summary of the thoughts of the entire organization of Oceana, is that it's not about we're here for the fishermen. It's not about the fishes, he said. And I'm using that word correctly. It's not about the fishes. It's about the fishermen. And so that sums it up pretty well. And here's probably one of the most powerful lobbying groups in the United States and in the world for our oceans, the health of our oceans long term. So what we have to do is we have to have some other type of institution help align them in terms of providing better education. I don't believe that Ted Danson really knows. I don't believe that he has a clue to what's going on. But somehow we have to have some institution align these other institutions in a better fashion, and then somehow affect all those that are doing this in terms of the decisions they're making, really by way of some type of taxation. And because we are driven by all these organizations that you're referring to, and our government's role is really driven by profits, and it's a very difficult machine to break right now. So the only way to do it, I think, is to eventually, and it might seem like a pie in the sky thing, but I don't think it will be. I think we're going to have to institute some form, at least in terms of environmental aspect, the effects to our environment as well as our health. So.
No, I don't think, especially nothing that the Food Empowerment Project stands for will ever be attained under capitalism. Capitalism is the problem that's impacting exploited peoples, exploited animals. The corporations are the ones who have the power. In fact, there are people in this country. So we're very proud to have signed a letter recently with other NGOs condemning that act. So I don't think it will happen under a capitalist system. Although, as one of my heroes stated, you have to fight within the belly of the beast. And that's what we choose to do. If consumers are who they're going to, we're going to go to those consumers. And we're going to use our power and our voices, and we're going to play off the fact that most people, rather if they are or not, see themselves as compassionate and just people and make them live up to that. We also will use the political powers that be, if that's what we have. So for us, no, I don't think it'll I mean, we won't get into my political views, whoops. But no, I do not think capitalism is a friend of the workers or the animals, or the environment for that matter.
If I could just briefly add, so yes, absolutely. I so agree with you. I'm glad you raised the point. And one of the dangers of the phrase we hear all the time, like vote with your dollars or vote with your fork, is it implies that some people get more votes, right? Because you have more dollars. Like every time you eat, that you're voting. Absolutely. And that's the key problem of the entire humane meat myth. Is that we want to imagine that factory farms came from nowhere. There's no history, there's no genealogy of where they came from. They came because of capitalism, that every single cut in animal welfare always produce, and worker treatment, always produce greater profitability. So if we don't stem with what's actually causing the problem, then if just by magic we went back to all the same original farms, it would recreate itself. And it's a combination of speciesism and hypercapitalism, and both of those are intertwined. So yes, absolutely you're right, and yes, absolutely as a movement, we have to start looking at the same way, and that's why I love what the work the Food Empowerment does, the way in which we actually recreate the same capitalist discourse in our own language. Thank you.
When an animal dies a natural death, does it suffer less than an animal that is slaughtered by humans?
Well, I think for one thing, we'd have to define what is a natural death, being eaten by a predator, dying of a disease, dying of old age. I'm not sure we can answer that question. As I mentioned this morning, what animals go through, what chickens, let's say, and turkeys go through in slaughter plants is absolutely horrific. I mean, they're hung upside down, and they go through a trough full of electrified water. Their eyes, their faces, their eardrums are electrified. There's nothing like that in nature, anywhere. They are intentionally not stunned, but just paralyzed, so that their feather follicles will release their feathers more easily after they are dead. I mean, electric shocks, to have electric shocks going through your body, I don't think there's anything more agonizing. And they're kept alive intentionally through the slaughter process so that their hearts will continue to pump out blood when they're in what they call the bleed-out tunnel. So I would say, I mean, when I hear people who raise, are like into keeping chickens free range or whatever, when they say, well, we just let predation take its course. We just let, it's natural for a chicken to be eaten by a hawk or by a fox or something like that. I disagree with that point of view. Number one, I think that if we're going to be keeping animals, we want to try to avoid as much as possible controlling their lives. But we do have an obligation to protect them where we can. Secondly, to die by a predator is a horrible death. I mean, imagine something with huge teeth coming after you, and I mean, that's not a good death. So I don't think any of us here want to romanticize the natural world by any means, because that is a horrible death. And I believe in keeping chickens. I'm certainly not going to expose them to death by a raccoon or a fox or a hawk. I guard against that. But at the same time, the kinds of unnatural sufferings that we impose upon animals we raise for food or use in experimentations, or for that matter in circuses, it's a type of suffering that they have not even evolved to even be able to accommodate at all. There are types of suffering that are really unnatural sufferings. The way we keep these animals, there's nothing in their psyches that enable them to make any sense out of the conditions we impose upon them. And that's why I always say that when people say, oh, well, a chicken doesn't suffer as much as a human being, I'm saying that chickens locked up 30,000 baby birds in a 500-foot-long building in filth, in crud, with no mothers, etc. I submit, these birds suffer more than we can even imagine. Because again, these cubicles, these enslavement warehouses and whatnot, these proceed from something in the human psyche. They don't proceed from anything in these animal psyches. Therefore, they are in conditions that are completely imposed upon them from outside themselves, from outside their nature. They are in a situation that is totally alien and totally inimical to who they are. And therefore, I submit that they suffer in ways we cannot even imagine and would not even suffer under those conditions. That their suffering is worse.
And isn't it wonderful that those are not our only two choices? The choice is not, will animals suffer from the predators or will animals suffer on factory farmings by the humans? We have another choice, which is we don't have to raise and kill animals. And that's the whole point, is that this discourse becomes about, but it's better than, but backyard slaughter is better than factory farming. Well, so is plant-based. The idea that it's somehow better if you sing to the animals and light incense and pray over them while you slit their throat, isn't it better to then not pray over them and light incense and slit their throat? Isn't the better option to not do that at all? And I think that's the whole point we're trying to make, is that those are not our only two options. We have other options. It's a false dichotomy.
This man over here also had his hand up a lot.
I was intrigued by Dr. McWilliams' idea that until the eating of animals is stigmatized, it will be condoned. I wanted to know how each of you feel about that statement and how you, if you agree with that, how that looks in your day-to-day interactions with people who are ordering the hamburger at your table or the fisherman who lives next door to you.
Start down there. I'm tired. I'm going to have to focus.
The question was, James McWilliams said that in order to get people to really stop eating animals, we have to stigmatize eating animals. And how would we respond to that? And what would that look like in terms of our discourse with people and the person who lives next door to us?
I think that for me, so I
The fisherman who lives next door.
am tired, so I have to apologize. And I could tell you about my whole week and why I'm so tired. No, I'm just kidding. So I have a full-time job that's not in the animal realm whatsoever. And what I found more than not is that, and again, I work for an environmental justice organization, but again, it's based on human rights, nothing to do with, based on electronics. But I find more than not that those people are more apologetic to me about animal consumption. And I think I find that more and more over time. Again, I'm from Texas, so back in the day, in the 80s, it wasn't like this, but more and more I find people are more apologetic in the sense that, if I say I'm vegan, their usual response is, well, I try not to eat too many, I tried to cut down. Or, I know someone who's a vegetarian. So they're already trying to be more like me than they're feeling, so I think what he's saying is like, okay, I'm not going to whatever doctor said because he's so freaking smart. But I would say for me that I think times have changed, and I think that more than not, people aren't seeing us like they used to, that we aren't the weird one. They feel more weird about the fact that they still eat animals. When people used to tell me, oh, I thought about you the other day, especially when I was in college, because I had ribs. Instead of being upset like I was, I took it as a compliment because they were having to actually acknowledge the fact they were consuming an animal. And there was something about that I had to take was actually a really good thing. So I think that there is a stigma in a sense now more than ever about animal consumption that we didn't used to have before, where people are more apologetic. I get to, in the coalition that I'm with, which is from groups all over the state of California, again, none of which are vegetarian, I'm always one who gets to decide what restaurant we eat at because they have to make sure I can eat something there, and I'm a very picky eater. So, as everybody who knows. So I have more control now than the animal. And that's why the Restaurant Association, I think, put something out about how important it is for restaurants to have a vegan option, because at the end of the day, it's almost always the vegan in a group who decides where a group goes to eat, because they have to be fed.
Yeah, and I did.
I do think it is, absolutely. And I think that some of it is us, too. You know what I mean? Like I said, the 17-year-old vegan me probably wasn't that great to be around. But I think, and I'll apologize to my family, but I won't apologize. I've been arrested over a dozen times, and I'd do it again if I had to for the animals. I would never change what some people perceive as extremism, but I would change in how I give the message about it.
Yeah, I call that the phenomenon of being the vegan in the room, that you don't have to do much more than say I'm vegan for it to stir all this stuff up. So you don't have to, I don't have to like set out to stigmatize anybody. I just have to speak my truth and say that I'm vegan and that why? Because I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to contribute to violence. And people get it immediately. And that's what's so beautiful about that is the mirror that you hold up so that it reflects back to others what they're not comfortable with. I don't set out to make anybody uncomfortable, but by speaking my truth, I will make someone uncomfortable. And that's not a bad thing because it shakes all that stuff up. And that's where all that passive aggressiveness comes in. That's where all of that defensiveness comes in, is because you're holding up that mirror. So, but it's a great responsibility, and I think it's a great privilege to be able to speak up. And that is where vegans come in because I've seen too often so many be apologetic about it. And if we speak up with integrity and truth and joy and pride to be compassionate, that's what people will respond to, and I think that's what we see just by being the vegan in the room.
Well, I share James McWilliams' view, and I think that's one of the things we're kind of saying here, that we want to get past the question of it's just about factory farming. No, it's about our relationship to other creatures. It's about the kind of relationship we want to have with other creatures. It's what we want them to have to go through or not go through because of us. And so I certainly do think that, we want, again, we have everything on our side. I mean, we should be so proactive and so proud to be representing a vegan diet. There's nothing to apologize there for. Everything is going for it, and it's not only the environmental issue, obviously, and the avoiding animal cruelty, but and of course health. But increasingly, there's like such an array of marvelous foods. Most people don't even know what vegan cooking is, We want to help them to know that. We want to do everything we can to make sure that those vegan foods are being purchased, and that they are, our purchases are enriching the producers of these foods so that these foods are actually visible in the supermarkets, Supermarket shelves, it's a lot of money for a company to buy good visible supermarket shelf space where those vegan foods are out there for people to see. So, we have this opportunity as well as really this responsibility to promote the wealth and joy of a vegan diet, and we should never, ever apologize for it. We should always be affirming the positive because it really is all positive. And again, to get away from, which is worse, factory farming or what you just described so well in your presentation, the horrors of humane farming, the horrors of humane farming. We need to get beyond that conversation and that either or splitting hairs on which is crueler and just move into the third option, which is we don't have to do this we don't have to have this kind of relationship to our fellow creatures. And we shouldn't have it. We need to move beyond it now into a new ethic and a new way of eating and living and perceiving our relationship to the animals who share this world with us.
I obviously have hesitation of the word stigmatize. It's not a word that works for me. What I will say is this. In the larger context of what Dr. Williams was talking about, he was talking about the history of smoking and the way that smoking went away. And I think that is such an empowering and encouraging touchstone. It feels so overwhelming in terms of veganism. Of course, actually our numbers are astronomically increasing, and for the first time ever, there's been a decrease in U.S. consumption of meat, even though worldwide it's increasing. But still, there's a way in which more people are becoming aware. And I think smoking is another touchstone where you had something that seemed totally common. Everyone did it. No one could comment on it. You did it for health. You did it to help your throat in the same sort of way, And then there was a sea change. And the sea change occurred not just with you're smoking, this idea of secondhand smoke, that your smoking isn't a personal decision because it hurts me and it hurts my kids. And what I think as one of the things that can be helpful is a realization that meat is secondhand harm. If it's destroying global warming, if it's polluting my water, if it's making my spinach get E. coli, which makes me get sick, that kills my children, that's not a personal decision. That's a personal decision you're imposing on me, the same way that secondhand smoke is a personal decision you're imposing on everyone else. And so I think that's one of the conversations that isn't happening that could be so powerful to help shift the discourse.
This gentleman
I just want to say, kind of related to what you were just saying. So did everybody hear the question? The economic, T. Colin Campbell said that if everyone went vegan, we would save 80% of the healthcare costs. We'd reduce 80% of the healthcare costs. So what's interesting about that is I was saying that now, because there's always some food that is the bad food that's kind of touted in the media as that's the problem, that's the problem with all of our health issues. It was trans fats for a while, and now it's sugar. And I don't know if you've heard about the recent studies that have come out that have really started this conversation around policy changes around sugar. And it's that same idea of, because the speculation is that sugar apparently is causing all of our problems, I would actually suggest that it were more related to the animal problem, the animal products. And it drove me crazy. It drives me crazy. I can't even listen to interviews because it drives me nuts, because I want to just jump through the radio and scream at the people, because they were just talking all about this as if that's the bane of our whole, existence, and that's the big problem. And if we took care of the problems with sugar, then we'd solve all of our health problems. But the point is, it's a good parallel, because what I wanted them to say, well, I'm sorry, can you do a show on dairy and meat specifically? Can you do it? Because they're saying that because of the health effects of sugar on people and then the health care system, it is a policy issue and not a personal issue. And so they should make policy changes around sugar specifically. So I think there's some really interesting things happening that could happen around animal products.
The only country that I know that is taking that seriously is Cuba. Cuba started doing teaching classes on national television on how to cook fruits and vegetables, and they instituted 22 vegetarian restaurants in Havana. Why? They have socialized medicine. And they knew that this would decrease the cost of the medicine. And they've been encouraging it for quite some time now. Let's hear
What's a change, people? What would that do?
So just some final comments, and we'll wrap it up. So.
I have just a quick comment before they start, and I'd like to thank everybody here for coming, participating. It's been a fantastic event. Thank you so much for bringing your intellect and all your questions and your concerns. Thank you to Hope and the team Hope and Karen, and thank you so much. Very well done. Really appreciate it. And thank you for all of the speakers here. I think you did a fantastic job.
Here's what I want to say. We have some tables out front, and some of us brought literature, and we want you to take it with you. We want you to distribute the literature, and we don't want to pack up our literature and take it home with us. We brought it for you. So please stop by the tables, stop by United Poultry Concerns and the other tables out there, and pick up literature that you can distribute to other people, because one of the things we're here about here is, getting the word out. And we have produced amongst ourselves some powerful words and some powerful ideas, and we want you to take those words and those brochures and those magazines and so on that we brought for you with you. And I'm not putting a guilt trip on you, but I am just reminding you that we don't look forward to taking everything back. We brought everything for you, so we're saying, please don't feel guilty about picking up that literature, taking it with you, and seeing that you distribute it wherever you can, because we want to amplify this message and spread this message. That's what we're about here.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you, Lauren, and everybody. I am so grateful to all of you because I am just so moved when I see people spend their entire day listening to amazing speakers and just find their voice so that they can go out and do this work. So it's really all of you who are planting these seeds and making it possible, and I really thank you, and I'm very grateful for all of you and for all of you for what you're doing.
I just want to thank everybody, Hope and team, and everybody who came. And I guess the one thing I hope that, and I don't mean this hope, I mean like the idea of hope, is that anything that you've heard today that resonates with you, and maybe you support other organizations who maybe after learning some of this information have a change of heart about some of the things that those organizations are doing and the path maybe that they're going down, I encourage you to contact those organizations and ask them the hard questions. Ask them certain things about campaigns that they're doing or words that they're using, or I don't want to name anybody specifically, but I just really encourage you. I mean, we need to be critical thinkers in this movement, and you have some people thinking critically here about these issues and giving you damn good ammunition, and why the animals desperately need us not to water down what they need from us. Because that's what the industry is already doing, and that's what those who kill animals are already doing. We don't need to be doing it for them. So please speak out for the animals and to those who you think are advocating for animals as well.
I will just say that I hope that this is the first annual Conscious Eating Conference. It was fantastic.
Thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate it. Let's have a great round of applause for our awesome speakers. Everybody did so well, gave us great information. Yes, it's been a wonderful day. Thank you all so much for coming, and hopefully we'll see you next year.